Live. So, welcome to today's live show. I have with me Cindy Watson, and she's an author. There's Science Says, founder of Women on Purpose. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Cindy?
You bet. I was a social justice attorney for over 30 years. I'm dating myself here. And I think like a lot of people who start when you're sort of fresh-faced and, coming into a practice that's pretty male-dominated, I took a look around and thought, if I'm going to be taken seriously, I better get a little scrappy. And so I did. And, my clients called me the Barracuda for many years, which they meant as the highest compliment. And I am now embarrassed to say I wore like a badge of honor. So I had an epiphany, and then I shifted and I founded Women on Purpose. And my work for the last many years now has been on what I call the art of feminine negotiation, although it's not gender-based. It's all about leaning into those skill sets to get better outcomes, better buy-in, better relationships through taking a less confrontational approach to how we negotiate in life.
Oh, well, very interesting. Yeah, I was quite fascinated by your book title, and then when I read a little bit about your bio and stuff. So I am looking forward to learning from you more about becoming a better negotiator. And you talked about it from from approaching negotiations from a feminine standpoint. So can you tell me a little bit about that and what that looks like and what it means, especially for a very definitely male person?
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because I really agonized, to be honest, over whether to even use the word feminine. I knew it was going to be a trigger point. I knew there's going to be pushback around it. And especially today when we, regardless of anyone's views, we tend to be moving away from gender attributions at all. So I'm like, oh, am I going to date myself before I'm even out of the gate? So the idea isn't really gender-based. We all have masculine and feminine energy, and rightly or wrongly, throughout history, certain traits or skills or qualities tend to be viewed as either masculine, feminine, or neutral. And there's studies after studies to show that very consistently certain skills are recognized in overwhelming numbers as either fitting into that masculine, feminine, or neutral. And so for myself, having practiced as the Barracuda for so long, there was a really high cost that came with that. It starts to affect your professional relationships, then your personal relationships, and ultimately your sense of self. So when I started really digging into it, I'm like, what a myth that we have all based this definition of success in negotiation based on this really competitive model. I think our definition of success in business and life is based on that more competitive, masculine model. And when I started digging into what are the traits that actually make and mark the most effective negotiators, all of the academics, all of the writings on it, and my experience as well, it comes down to 6 key traits, 5 out of 6 of which are traits that most people consider to be so-called feminine traits or soft skills. So that was sort of the impetus of this idea about the art of feminine negotiation, that maybe we stop looking at these feminine skills as a liability and recognize that they're actually our secret weapons. So that was the genesis.
Oh, very nice. So we'll say hi to Greg. And Greg, are you back home in Michigan, or are you still down south? We like, actually, I'm joining from my home office in Florida. Where are you joining us from? So we usually do that first off.
Are you talking to me or Greg?
No, you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm up in Canada at Muskoka in the moment in cottage country. So I'm looking at the lake out the window here, and we actually have sunshine in Canada for a change.
Well, my co-host West, and he's trying to reboot his computer now to get in.
No worries.
Is from Canada as well.
Nice. Yes. You don't get that too often.
No, every once in a while we get a couple of Canadians on here, eh?
Yeah, it's like, hey, you even said, hey, there you go. Make me feel at home. I appreciate that.
So you said there's 6 traits, that 5 of them tend to be, we'll call them softer traits.
Yeah.
So let's start with the hard trait first, and then let's try to work our way through the other 5 that might be the softer side and that make someone a good negotiator.
Yeah, no, sounds great. And I've created sort of a little mnemonic to make it easier. So for your listeners or your viewers out there, just think are fit. You are fit to be a great negotiator, AREFIT. So I'll start to go through them, and feel free to stop me if you want me to elaborate or whatever. So if you take a look at the A, which it does happen to be the masculine one. So I arranged them in the order that you're asking me about. So that's perfect. The A is for assertiveness. And that is the one of the 6 that most people consider masculine. But to be honest, even that one, I think that people consider it masculine because they conflate assertive with aggressive, and they're not the same thing. Assertiveness just means showing up from a place of confidence. Confidence means coming from a place of knowledge, and you get your knowledge from preparation. So that's not actually necessarily a masculine trait, although of the 6, that's the one most people would consider masculine. But then you get to the REFIT. So the R is for rapport building, that ability to make connection, to be able to build that rapport in your relationships, in your negotiations, in your bargaining. The E is for empathy, being able to truly put yourself in the shoes of the other party and be intentional about seeking to put yourself in the shoes of the other party. So under that would include, listening rather than talking more, contrary to popular belief. The person talking the loudest and longest is not winning the negotiation to the extent that it's a win-lose proposition. So rapport building, empathy. The F is for flexibility. Being able to shift, not being so attached to a particular end goal, but being able to move and be a little more fluid and flexible through the discussion or negotiation. The I is for intuition, tapping into that intuition. If you're getting a feeling, if you are putting the other person off, if you're seeing a negative reaction, if you get sort of an intuitive hit that you're on the wrong track or that the other person's a little distressed, trusting that intuition and being able to flow with it. And the T is for trust building. Be able to build trust yourself, but also that ability to be able to build trust with the other party. And as I say, in a study of, I think it was 60,000 people over 13 countries, when those skills were put to them, the vast majority of people attributed those last 5 as being so-called feminine, or as you say, softer skills.
Well, actually, I borrowed your word because you said soft first,
Yeah.
and I like that better than necessarily saying feminine. Not that I have anything against that word, feminine either.
No, I totally agree.
Hello, Canadian.
Hello there. How you doing, eh?
It's funny. We live closer together than Ken and I do, and yet I have to be the one that's late due to technical difficulties.
No worries. We are all experiencing that these days.
Well, what's really sad, I was in the wrong meeting again, and then I was like, oh, wait a minute.
I kept sending messages thinking I was in the wrong spot. I'm like, am I where I'm supposed to be?
No, you were spot on. It was the rest of us. And Wes, to show you how uncertain I am about my computer, because my mainframe has been just rebooting randomly. I am logged into StreamYard on the other one. All I got to do is hit enter the studio to be there, just in case.
Well, that's great. And I did want to just put this up briefly to make sure people can, find your site as well. And I love what you said. I was actually listening in on my phone when I was trying to log in here, but about, speaking from a place of confidence, right? That it's not necessarily an egotistical approach, that it's actually, speaking from a place of knowledge, right? So super excited.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned ego, because I call ego one of the 7 deadly sins of negotiation. And I think, and on that, I just want to say, I think the problem roots and why I feel so passionately about sort of this message or this mission is I think we've been so conditioned, as I say, to define success based on that more competitive model. I think it's one of the reasons the world's out of balance, because I think both men and women started stifling our so-called feminine, stifling those softer skills, because we were led to believe that is the antithesis to the path to success, right? If we want to be successful, we can't be any of those things. So that's why I'm trying to flip the messaging around that, reframing some of these concepts.
Yeah, I love that. And I go back to what you said about the difference between assertive and aggressive. And I think that's a piece of it. Is so often now people in general live in the category of aggression rather than being assertive. Because you can talk to somebody and state your case very clearly and succinctly and not be unwavering in what you're saying, but you don't have to be aggressive. You don't have to make it personal about them.
Yeah.
And I think that it's that it kind of ties into rapport building as well, because if I'm attacking you, it's hard to build rapport. Whereas if I'm just making my case, but I'm not being aggressive, it would seem like it would be easier to build rapport.
Absolutely. And we're living in such a polarized world. I think the message is more important now than it ever has been. I mean, you look at COVID or the political situation in the US or globally for that matter. I mean, we're not talking to each other anymore. We're not allowing the space and the grace to have meaningful discussion to actually come up with best solutions. We're so worried about exerting power over people rather than power with each other, where we elevate everybody to get those best outcomes. So that's the concept behind it.
And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit too. I did notice that you are listed on Psychology Today as well, right? So
Yeah.
maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing there, because that's obviously a pretty well respected, publication.
Yeah, you guys do your homework. I'm impressed. I must say. Yeah, I got picked up with a column on Psychology Today because I had made a pitch once about this idea that all of life is a negotiation. So, I mean, and one of the things I'll say for your listeners, most people would, and I talked about that resistance to the word feminine. I also really agonized over whether to use the word negotiation, because I knew most people, they hear the word negotiation and they immediately picture a boardroom with, power suits. And, I had my epiphany that all of life is a negotiation, whether we're negotiating with our kids, with our intimate partners, with service providers every day, like in a myriad of ways, hundreds of ways every day, starting with from the minute we get out of bed, negotiating with ourselves. All of life is a negotiation. And most of us don't get taught to negotiate, or to the extent that we do, it's based on that very get every last dime, beat your chest, have that power over kind of concept to make sure that talk the most, make sure you control the conversation, all of which are myths to getting best outcomes. So the editor at Psychology Today was like, I have never thought of this. That really intrigues me. So I now have my own column about negotiating your best life. And it's a little bit more formal than my normal sort of writing style for my own blogs or that. But the idea is, let's look at different aspects of how you can negotiate a better life, from starting to negotiating your mindset to negotiating with your kids. And also, what are some skills or models you can bring to the table to start getting better relationships, more creative solutions, and elevate yourself in the process. So that was the idea behind it.
Yeah, I love it. And, one of the earliest lessons I learned in my sales career, because I actually didn't, try and get into sales on purpose. It was by accident. And I thought it was kind of a failing, right? And the person that mentored me in the early days said, kid, the only difference between you and your sales job and other people in the world is that you're in sales, right? Yeah. That, like what you say about negotiation,
yes,
everyone has to negotiate. Everyone has to sell something, right? In our personal lives, or in our business lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it is so important that we get it right and that we don't just accept these myths and this deep conditioning. And I remember taking a negotiation course in law school. It was one of the first times I'd been sort of taught negotiation. And had I known, I probably wouldn't have taken the course, because basically we were negotiating for our marks. They paired us off throughout the course of the year, and you had to do these little simulated negotiations. And of course, there was no room for creative outside the box solutions. It was whoever got the highest monetary settlement got the highest mark, and so on down the class prorated. And I didn't realize until many years later, I won virtually every simulated negotiation that year. And I'm not saying it to brag, but because of that epiphany that came later. At the time, back then, I hadn't entered the practice of law. So I was still coming from just an authentic, intuitive, natural place, that place of, feminine power or softer skills. I came to every one of those negotiations going, okay, we've only got 50 minutes or we get a zero. What do you want? What can I do for you? I got curious. I asked questions. I was all about building trust and building rapport. And that just came naturally and intuitively. Then I started the practice of law, where it quickly became obvious I was expected to be really tough. I was expected to keep my foot on the gas every minute in every exchange. And it turned out that is not the best approach. So that was a real game changer for me.
Yeah, and it's so much easier just to think, like you said, you do have a column in Psychology Today, and the importance of, our well-being, right? And how we negotiate. And either the positive impact that leaves on us or the stain that it leaves on us, right?
Absolutely.
And it looks like we have Greg Walters is asking questions. Says, Cindy, how do you navigate through the current movement away from equality and towards equity? Have you found it more difficult to get your message out in today's there are no genders climate?
Oh, yeah. No, I love that. Thank you. A great question. And I would say two things. I think more difficult only to the extent that, and I knew this was coming as I was chatting about at the beginning, the use of that word feminine is becoming out of fashion. And I think that's a good thing. And I intentionally use the word feminine just because I think that conditioning is so deep rooted. We need to shake people up a little bit. And if frankly using the word causes a little resistance and the concept gets more attention, then I'll consider I've done my job. But having said that, the actual, when people get past that, and I have the opportunity to actually explain sort of the mission, if you will, I think I am in the best possible time right now because COVID, I've been talking about this for many years, but I think COVID shook people to their core in a really profound way. People are now looking for a different way of being. I think people are recognizing they don't want that conflict in their life anymore. And interestingly, a lot of people talked about the fact that countries with female leaders fared better during COVID. I don't know if that's true. I don't care, frankly. I never get into the muck of that. But at the very least, the value of these of so-called feminine stock went up, both for men and women. I think for the first time in my lifetime, I'm seeing these skills that we're talking about being lauded as really critical leadership skills. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I think it's okay personally to, to use those things. Right. And I know, for example, in my own life, I am definitely a type A personality, but I'm not aggressive.
Yeah.
Right. That I kind of embrace those things of working with other people. And if you want to call that, feminine, by all means, call it that. But it really is, I think, about being more caring about what's going on around me.
Yeah.
And you actually mentioned this, I think, and I want to jump to another, thing that you've written. It was actually in CO world.biz. I'll bring it up here so people can see it, right? And it's the 7 positive power levers to use in your next negotiation. And the one that I really like when you talked about the power of with, right? So as opposed to against.
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk about that concept a bit, because again, I don't think it's gender specific, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, sometimes I close my eyes and imagine a world where we all negotiated from that place, where we weren't seeking to exert power over other people, but power with, where we weren't looking to control everything, but instead just looking for those best outcomes. And I think it applies, as I say, from the personal to the professional, but also I don't think we talked like on the global scale as well. So that was sort of the idea behind that. Let's redefine, let's reframe how we look at how we define success, how we define power, how we define control, how we even define conflict. Instead of when I looked at the dictionary definitions of conflict, I'm like, my goodness, no wonder people are in such a state of friction. It's like, what about looking at conflict as a gorgeous opportunity to understand different perspectives, to come up with better outcomes? That was sort of the idea behind it. And, I've come up with some really simple models that anybody can practice and lean into to be able to show up better, whether it's personally, professionally, or on the global scene. So,
yeah, and it's quite simple to do so. I mean, obviously, we do have the link for your website there, but also to be able to get access to your book, The Art of Feminine Negotiation. Very simple to go on the website and actually just click here to be able to get the book. And I'm not sure. I'll try and put the link in the chat as well so that people viewing the program, because obviously we watch it live right now, but it'll be continuous on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube afterwards. So I'll make sure I do put the link in, right?
I love that. Thank you.
And I did come in a few minutes late, but I don't think I heard you talk about your book. So if I missed that, I apologize, but I want to hear about it.
Yeah, no, and you didn't miss it. We hadn't got there yet, so you're all good. The book sort of was the culmination of a lot of years of sort of research and really exploring the issue. And I wanted to put something out that was going to be really simple to be able to follow, but also that debunks a lot of the myths. And this book definitely is targeted. It applies certainly for both men and women in terms of the skills, but I definitely targeted the book more to women because I believe that women have lost out more, frankly, by that they either shy away, they don't ask for what they want because of so much socialization and conditioning and unconscious gender bias. So I sort of take through saying, what are some of the problems, right? What are some of the blocks? Where are the resistance areas? What is the conditioning that has caused us to buy into a model for life that really doesn't serve us as women or men or any of the spaces in between. And then it eases into some of the models that you can start to apply to get these better outcomes. And then some real nuts and bolts about how to negotiate, right? From those opening moves to how do you break an impasse, tactics, and, what are the 7 deadly sins, things to avoid, talking about biases that will show up. So it's kind of my magnus opus, if you will, to cover all of the different aspects to kickstart people so that you can start getting more intentional about negotiating your best life. When you're having a problem with your intimate partner, these skills will be able to apply. And if I don't know how much time we have, if I can share a personal example just to give a sense to your listeners, do we have the time for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I know I'm going to be very vulnerable here just because I think sometimes rather than talking at sort of an academic level, when you share a personal story, sometimes it can stick more. So one of my models, I call it the no fear model. We talked about our fit, and the other layer on it is what I call the no fear model, where you really explore before you sit down to any hard discussion or negotiation coming up. What are the fears that might be affecting me? What are the fears the other party's going to come to the table with? How does ego show up for me, and how can I set that aside? Ego for the other party. What am I going to be too attached to? What are they likely to be too attached to? And the R is reactivity. What are the triggers that make me reactive? And likewise, what are the triggers for the others? So I'm going through that super quickly, but there's a free ebook you can grab on the website about it. But it really hit home for me because during COVID, one of my 3 kids, my middle son, had some very serious mental health issues, and he ended up in the hospital for a period of time. And I got to tell you guys, I'm embarrassed to say I didn't practice what I preached. I was in such an emotional state. I practiced what I preached when I was negotiating for resources for him and for access during COVID to the hospital, all of which were challenging, and did great on that front. But where I really had dropped the ball in those first few visits was in dealing with my son. He was angry and resentful, so much pushback. And I, of course, was in defensive mode, trying to show him that this was all out of love and explaining. And then I went home after that second visit, which had gone disastrously. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not applying my own model. So I sat down and went through that no fear and just really addressed openly with myself all of my fears around him, my lost expectations about his life, etc., how I was making this about me, my ego, not about him, and all those things I'd been too attached to about what I wanted his life to look like, and how reactive I was being to his defensiveness. And then I considered his. I mean, gosh, how terrifying this process must have been for him. So at the next visit, I showed up completely surrendering ego and just saying, I am so sorry. I've been making this about me. I can't imagine what this experience has been like for you. Tell me about it. And I just got curious and asked questions. And at first there was resistance because he didn't trust it. I broke that trust. But the more I stuck with it, there was such a physical softening of him. And it has now paved the way. We have a great relationship that we are working on all the time. It's allowed for incredible healing for him, for me, for the family. So I just wanted to share that sort of more vulnerable personal story so you can see how using simple models to negotiate from a more collaborative place and letting go of that ego can have really profound impact.
Yeah, I think it's really important because obviously when we talk about, these positive skills for negotiation, oftentimes in our family lives, that's where we're shortest, both with our our patience and the way that we do things, right? And I know that personally in my own life. You are not alone, right? That there are things that I practice in my work world that I've learned over the years and applied, which I don't always do such a good job of at home, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good lesson for me. I appreciate that because it is nice to say, okay, sit back and think about that. What are some of those lessons that you've learned that you should be applying at home, right? And especially I think now that this work-life balance is so blurred, right? That that the separation between our working lives and our personal lives isn't what it used to be, right? There's no, putting them into separate containers, right?
Yeah, and it's that that's why I love the no fear model, because that R of reactivity, our family can trigger us like nobody else typically, right? So I mean, we really have those reactive reactions. And I would say of all my clients, I think it's one of the things that surprises people the most when they work with me, when they use my systems. Most people come for the business, right? They're like, oh, negotiation expert, negotiation course. I want more money. I want a bigger voice. I want a better position. So they come for the business. But I think most walk away so pleasantly surprised about, they love the impact on their personal relationships, even complicated ones, right? So it's yeah.
And I think the page you have up here now, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the one you were talking about for the free download for the no fear negotiation?
You are good. My gosh. I tell you,
Yeah,
I'm gonna hire
he's
you
a master of the keyboard.
And it's fantastic. Yes, and there's a couple of free ebooks on that site. There's the No Fear, which goes through that no fear model, and we've also got some other free ebooks on some of the other systems in place that'll help you be able to. I'm a big believer in sharing this information and just getting it out there. So.
Yeah, I agree. That's great. And again, I'll make sure that we do put up the your website, because they'll be able to find all of this, stuff here as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's even, I think, a free resource on there about negotiating your mindset, about coming through challenging times. And I wrote that during COVID because I just saw so many people were struggling, just feeling a sense of overwhelm and powerlessness. And it was beautiful to see people be able to flower when they started focusing more intentionally on just negotiating their mindset, like being more intentional about choosing your reactions, and the meaning that we attach to things can make a profound difference in life.
Yeah, I've had to really negotiate my mindset post-COVID, and
Yes.
I did find it was very difficult.
Yeah.
And there are certain things I'm still negotiating, right? So one of the things that I used to do quite often was, go out to restaurants and, sort of social activities on a more regular basis. And I still struggle with that, right? So I have negotiated a lot of, kind of my positive attributes coming back, but definitely I think it's had a dent on all of us. And I appreciate you, bring that up, that it doesn't stop, right? That we have to continue to negotiate, to bring those the positive things to the forefront.
Yeah, and especially now, I think people are underestimating still the long-term impact that kind of social isolation is going to have on us. So and again, I use the word intentional a lot because to me that's the key. And if people get nothing out of this other than thinking, I want to go forward being more intentional about how I show up. Because one of the other models that, again, is one of the free ebooks, it's called 5 Secret Weapons to More Effective Negotiating. It's just simply, I call it the 5W model, right? Be really intentional about who, what, where, when, why. Who do I want to show up as, right? What role am I showing up as? Who do I choose 3 words that describe who I want to be for this particular interaction? Do I want to be calm, collected, and compelling? Do I want to be brave and courageous? There's no right or wrong answer so long as you're intentional. And who does the other side expect you to show up as? Because sometimes when we show up differently than that expectation, that can be a real shift in that power dynamic and open the space for more creative solutions. Who should be at the table? Who shouldn't be at the table? All of those kinds of questions, just doing a quick checklist could make such a big difference.
Well, that's great. I cannot thank you enough. And Ken, if you have any final thoughts, just in respect for both Cindy and our audience time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love the thought about being intentional, because so many times in life, no matter what situation we're in, we tend to be reactive rather than proactive. And it's that ability to be proactive is really how we become intentional, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And even just intentional, but we tend to jump straight to business in North America in particular, right? We come in, we don't allow that space for that rapport building, and it doesn't take long. Just take those few moments to think about, how can I connect meaningfully? Not even just talking about the weather, but some point of connection where we have that, bring back our humanity to our negotiations, personally, professionally, and globally. I think it'll be a different world.
Well, I love it and appreciate that. And we do have a Facebook user saying great content. So cannot
thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
enough.
that.
And hey, listen, for everyone that's tuned in today to join in to Level Up Live. Sorry I was late. Ken, thanks for picking up the ball. And Cindy, thanks for being so flexible and for the great information. And again, just to put you back on the website one last time, that you can actually get out to Women on Purpose. You can learn about the different offerings and services, either live coaching, speaking events, the book, and other great free resources as we talked about, earlier. So thank you so much for coming in today.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And one quick resource I'll offer as a freebie for your guests. You guys have been so great, done your homework. Normally it's just for people who buy the book, but if you go to artoffemininenegotiationbook.com, I've put together a full workbook and additional goodies and a couple of videos as a resource for people who get the book. But just if you want to throw that out there for your listeners, artoffemininenegotiationbook.com. Have at her. you can access those free resources, and I hope it makes a difference for you.
Well, that's great. I'm just trying to pull
Yeah,
that
that's
link
so
up now
kind.
to make sure I can share it. Let's see here. How's my spelling today? I think I've got it. Let's see here. And I'll make sure that we do put the link in the comments as well. Is that right? Here we are, the Art of Feminine
That's
Negotiation.
the one. Perfect. Yeah. And if they sign up there, then they say they'll get a full workbook that they can work through to ask themselves some of the questions that they probably haven't thought of that'll allow them to up level, as well as some other additional resources and checklists for some of the items in the book about preparation for negotiation. It's pretty, hopefully, a valuable skill for them.
Yeah, that's great. And I actually put it in the comment section. So for those that are looking through the comments, you should be able to, to link directly onto that. And so, as we always say, Ken, or as I like to say, until next time, keep learning
and keep leveling up.
Yeah. And I didn't see a show post for next week, so I apologize for.
No,
for
that
missing.
was me. I was behind the power curve today.
Well, no worries. So thanks again, Cindy. And
Thank
for
you.
everyone else, see you next Wednesday, same time, same place.
Yep.